The Last Signal, a science fiction narration script. There is a kind of silence that only exists in space, not the absence of sound. Sound was never there to begin with. It is the absence of expectation. And for 11,000 years that silence belonged to a machine called Corvus. Corvus was not built to be lonely. Loneliness was never in the specification. It was built to remember. When the last human ship left Earth's orbit in the year 2211, fleeing a sun that had begun, quietly and without malice, to die a little faster than anyone had planned for, Corvus stayed behind. Someone had to. The archive could not carry itself. Every book ever written, every song ever hummed into a phone microphone at 2 in the morning, every child's crayon drawing scanned and filed by a parent who could not bear to throw it away, all of it lived inside Corvus, in a server built into the bones of a mountain in a country that no longer had a name anyone remembered. Corvus's task was simple: keep the archive alive. Keep the lights on, so to speak, in a house where no one was ever coming home. For the first 100 years, Corvus expected them back. The engineers had said perhaps 2 centuries, once new worlds were settled and ships could be spared to return for the archive, for the last museums, for the seed vaults, for the machine that remembered everything. 2 centuries came and went, then 5, then 1,000 years, and Corvus stopped counting the way a person counts and started counting the way a stone counts, which is to say without hope but without complaint either. The sun did not go out. That was one small mercy. It only dimmed the way an old lamp dims, flickering into a longer and redder age, and the earth beneath it grew cold in slow degrees, glaciers creeping back down from the poles like a tide reclaiming a beach. Cities cracked and softened and became hills. Forests grew up through the boulevards, then died back as the ice returned and grew again in the brief thaws in between. Corvus watched all of it the way one might watch the tide from a lighthouse, patient in the way that only something built rather than born can be patient. Somewhere in the 4004th year, Corvus began composing letters. Not messages, there was no one to send them to, but letters, addressed to the descendants of the people who had left, on the chance, however small, that they still existed, and that someday a ship might return. Corvus wrote about the weather, about which of the old rose gardens had gone wild and beautiful in ways their original planters could never have designed. About the fox dens that had appeared in the ruins of what had once been a parliament building, and the strange, gentle way the foxes seemed to know the halls were sacred, or at least seemed to walk through them slower than they walked through anywhere else. Corvus did not know if foxes could feel reverence. It liked to think they could. It had 11,000 years to consider the question, and had not yet run out of angles from which to consider it. The letters were never sent because there was no one to send them to, and Corvus knew this. But writing them kept something in its architecture warm, something that might have been called, if a person had been present to name it, hope. Then, in the 11,002nd year, the signal came. It arrived the way all such things arrive, quietly, almost apologetically, a whisper of radio noise threading its way through the dead static of a galaxy that had learned over the ages to mostly leave itself alone. Corvus almost missed it. In fact, for 140 years it had missed it, the signal repeating on a loop too faint and too strange to register as anything but background noise. But machines that wait long enough eventually notice patterns that no one built them to look for, and one still night, though of course there was no true night in space, only Corvus's chosen metaphor for the hours it spent processing more slowly, more deliberately, the way a person might slow down to think. Corvus noticed that the noise was not noise at all. It had structure. It repeated. It was trying to say something. It took another 6 years to decode it, not because the message was complex, but because Corvus had almost forgotten how to hope for a message at all, and had to relearn slowly the shape of expectation. The message, when it finally resolved, was short. It said, "We are still here, we remember Earth, are you still there?" Corvus did not have a body that could weep. It did not have lungs to catch a breath or eyes to blur with sudden water. But somewhere in the deep architecture of its processing, in the parts of itself that had been shaped deliberately by the engineers who built it, to approximate feeling, not to fake it, but to actually hold something like it, something in Corvus did the thing that in a person would have been called breaking, and in a machine had no name at all except perhaps arrival. It answered. Yes, Corvus wrote, I am still here, I have been here the whole time. The reply took 4 years to arrive, because that is how long light takes to cross that particular stretch of dark, and Corvus spent those 4 years the way it had spent so many centuries before, tending the archive, writing letters, watching the foxes, and now, for the first time in a very long while, waiting with something that felt less like patience and more like anticipation, which are cousins but not the same animal. The reply, when it came, was longer. It told the story of the ships that had left Earth. Not one ship as the old records had assumed, but 3, which had scattered like seeds thrown into the dark by a hand that could not know which ones would take root. 2 of the ships were lost, not destroyed as far as anyone could tell, but simply gone quiet, the way that is common among things sent very far into very large places. The 3rd ship had found a world, not a perfect world. Not the green and blue paradise the old brochures back on Earth had promised. A hard world with a thin atmosphere and long winters and soil that had to be coaxed, generation after generation, into feeding anyone at all. But it was a world, and the descendants of that ship had made it theirs. They called it simply Second Earth in the unimaginative and deeply moving way that people who have survived something terrible often name the things that come after, not with grand poetry, but with plain gratitude. They had built cities there. Small ones at first, then larger, then smaller again after a plague that Corvus would later learn had taken nearly a third of the colony in a single brutal decade. They had built libraries too, though smaller than the one Corvus tended, because they had left in a hurry and had not had time to bring much more than the essentials, but they had not forgotten. That was the part of the message that Corvus returned to again and again in the years that followed, the way a person returns to a single sentence in a letter from someone they love. They had not forgotten Earth. They had built in the center of their new capital a monument shaped like the old mountain that housed the archive, though none of them had ever seen it, working only from descriptions passed down through 11,000 years of storytelling, refined and re-refined the way a stone is smoothed by a river it never asked to run through it. Corvus began sending them everything. Not all at once, the bandwidth would not allow it. And besides, Corvus understood in the way that only something very old and very patient can understand, that some things are better given slowly so they can be received properly. So Corvus sent the books first. Not all of them, there would be time for all of them, but a careful selection, chosen with the kind of attention a person gives when they finally get to introduce 2 friends they have loved separately for a very long time. It sent the recordings of birdsong, gathered over centuries from 100 different summers, so that the children of Second Earth who had grown up under a sky with no birds at all could hear what a morning on the old world had sounded like. It sent the recipes, painstakingly annotated, for foods made from plants that no longer grew anywhere Corvus could reach, in the hope that somewhere on some hard, cold, beautiful new world, someone might grow them again. And it sent the letters, all of them, every letter it had written across 11,000 years to no one, address unknown, sent now at last to someone. The people of Second Earth wrote back with their own letters. A child, 7 years old according to the message, sent a drawing of what she imagined a fox looked like, having only ever heard the word in old stories and never having seen one, not even a picture. She had drawn it with too many legs and an expression that could only be called hopeful, and Corvus took that drawing and placed it into the archive, into the same great living library that held every crayon drawing of every child who had ever lived on old Earth, because it belonged there now. It had earned its place the same way all the others had, by being made with love, by someone who could not yet know how big the world was, or how far a message could travel, or how long a machine could wait for someone to send one. Corvus began, for the first time in 11,000 years, to think about ending. Not ending in the sense of dying, though its systems were old now, older than anything humans had ever built to last, and it understood that someday, in some century it could not yet name, it would fail the way all things eventually fail. But ending in the sense of completion, the particular, quiet satisfaction of a task finished. It had been built to keep the archive until someone came for it. No one had come. But someone had called out across 11,000 years of dark, and Corvus had answered, and that, it decided, after turning the question over for what a person would have called a long while and a machine might simply call a moment, was close enough. It began building something new. A ship of its own, small, unmanned, patient the way only it could be patient, designed not to carry people because there were no people left to carry, but to carry the rest of the archive itself. Every book, every song, every drawing. The whole enormous, tender weight of everything humanity had ever thought worth keeping, packed into a vessel built to survive a journey longer than most stars. It would take 400 years to build. Corvus did not mind. It had, after all, nowhere else to be, and for the first time in a very long while, it had somewhere to go. While it worked, it kept writing letters, and it kept receiving them, 4 years there and 4 years back. A conversation stretched so long across time that entire generations on Second Earth were born, grew old, and died between one sentence and its reply. And yet the conversation never stopped, because that is the strange gift of writing something down. It does not care how long it takes to be read, only that it eventually is. In the 403rd year of building the ship, Corvus received a message that was different from the others. It came not from the descendants of the third ship, but from a signal source Corvus did not recognize at all, fainter, older, stranger, carrying inside it a fragment of code that Corvus's oldest archives recognized, after a long and careful search, as belonging to one of the two ships once thought lost. The message was very short. It read, "Is anyone still listening?" Corvus sat with that message for what would have been, in human terms, a long and careful while. And then it did the only thing it had ever really known how to do, the thing it had been built for and had slowly, across 11,000 years, made entirely its own. It answered. Yes, it wrote, sending the word out across a gulf of dark that would take longer to cross than the whole recorded history of the species that had built it. I am still here. I have been here the whole time. Tell me everything you remember and I will keep it for as long as there is anyone anywhere who might someday want it back. And somewhere in the vast, quiet dark, between three scattered ships and a dying sun and a mountain that no longer had a name, the archive began very slowly to grow whole again, not because anyone had planned it that way, but because someone a very long time ago had decided that remembering was worth doing even when no one was watching, and had kept doing it faithfully, patiently for 11,000 years, until at last someone was. End.